Okay, good morning, everyone. So today we have Amberyn Thomas and Justine Cawley. Cawley? Yep. Amberyn's the Director of Learning and Research Services at the UQ Library, and Justine is the Associate Director for Scholarly Communication and Repository Services. And they're going to discuss the services that the UQ Library offers to help us publish, especially surrounding open access journals, and also discuss the global climate of open access publishing. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I'll hand over to Justine.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. Everybody in the room, I met you briefly at the morning tea just now. Thank you for inviting Amberyn and I to come and talk to you about strategic scholarly publishing and some sort of broader information about open we've well. We've got Amberyn on the Zoom, and she's going to deliver the first portion of the seminar. So we'll hand over to her now. I'm not sure, Amberyn, if we can see you if you have your camera on or not, but we can. We should be able to hear you, so we're ready to go when you are.
That's great. Thank you, Justine. I do actually have my camera on, and if you can see me, I'm sitting in my office across from the Great Court, but I'm in between meetings, so I'm afraid I didn't have time to walk across, and I'll have to leave and hand you back to Justine as soon as I've done my bit. So I do apologise about that, but it is lovely to be able to come along even virtually to share some of the things that we're doing in this space. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Justine. The first thing that I'd really like to address is that when we come to talk to you about open access and scholarly publishing, we do so in the knowledge that it's a part of a much broader landscape that you work in. So there's a whole range of things that are on your mind other than open access and scholarly publishing, but some of these are actually impacted by the way you publish or the considerations that you make when it comes to open access. So some of those things are on this slide, and it's absolutely not my intention to go through all of them, but they are things like university rankings. They're things like open research and the reproducibility of research. It's the way scholarly communication is changing, and it's also that whole of research lifecycle approach that's now gaining traction, so that open research piece and the sharing of research data. If we move on to the next slide, I thought it might be useful to position open access globally first, so to give you some insight into the sorts of things that are happening across the world. So when we look within universities globally, the things that are happening that are relevant are many universities are signatories of DORA, which is the Declaration on Research Assessment. The reason that's important is that it effectively tries to decouple or de-emphasise the importance of things like the journal impact factor. So it's all about responsible research evaluation so as not to drive poor publishing practice or publishing practice that really just chases the impact factor to the exclusion of necessarily the right choice of outlet for a particular piece of research. We have within many institutions formal governance structures that include open research as part of that, and I've put there that the University of York is one of them. They have an open research strategy group that formally reports into their research committee. In many institutions, they have whole of university approaches to the way they negotiate with publishers. The most high profile example of that is the University of California and the work they've done with Elsevier. They were able to effectively cancel Elsevier and come to a negotiation over time with them. So they've now got access again, but there was a period of time where academics at the University of California, all of their campuses didn't have access to any Elsevier content, which really was only possible because they had buy-in from the broader academy. In other institutions, there's some major drivers for open access that we don't have in Australia. So, for example, in the UK, the Research Excellence Framework, which is very similar in many ways to the Excellence in Research for Australia initiative that we have in Australia, they actually have an open access requirement for publications that are submitted for evaluation within the REF. So we have nothing like that within Australia. In the funding landscape globally, there is a push for open by many funders, and a few years ago, Coalition S, a group of funders got together and put together a plan to open research more completely and from as soon as it was published to make it open. And this was called Plan S. There's a number of, it's dominated by people from funders from Europe, but it does have buy-in from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and a range of funders globally. In response to this push from funders and from universities, and noting that the open access movement has been around now for at least 20 years, if not longer, publishers are responding, but they're not responding in ways that, you know, ultimately the big publishers are there to make money. So, but there are a number of things that are interesting. The one thing that they're doing that we are also capitalising on are read and publish deals, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later in the presentation. But they're playing really sophisticated games, and one of those games is really clear through Springer Nature's guided OA model. And in that model, basically you pay upfront, they'll do some peer review, and they'll find a journal to publish your output, but it costs significant amounts of money. It removes control from the submitting author around which outlet it actually ends up with. And there's a whole raft of different schemes that publishers are trialling, all in an attempt to basically retain the revenue that they have got accustomed to over the years. If we go to the next slide, please, Justine. So when we look at what's happening nationally in Australia, I'm going to start with the middle piece. I'll start with what's happening in the funder landscape, because this really sets the tone for the Australian scene. Within Australia, we had relatively early adoption of open access policies by the Australian Research Council, followed a year later by the NHMRC. But those policies really haven't gained a lot of traction, haven't changed behaviour an awful lot, because they're fairly weak. So for both of those policies, it's possible to comply by not complying, so that you can be an exception and still comply with that policy. There was an attempt last year, I think it was, for the NHMRC to strengthen their open access policy, but there was enough pushback by the sector that they didn't do that, so they put that on hold. Now, what that has meant is that within Australia, universities approach open access across the full spectrum. So we have some institutions that have very strong open access policies that are actually mandated and enforced is possibly the wrong word, but strongly encouraged, and they shine a light on it, and there is a real emphasis placed on it for your typical academic. We also have within Australia but then we also have some institutions that don't have an open access policy. So it really is that full suite of things. We also have within Australia the Council of Australian University Librarians that are responsible for negotiating the big deals with big publishers like Elsevier. And they're pursuing read and publish deals to try and roll in article processing charges as part of that upfront subscription fee. And that's an attempt to at least deal with the problems that we see within the scholarly publishing landscape at the moment. And I'll talk a little bit more about what they are later on. The other thing that's happened nationally in Australia is that there's this very strong focus on the green route, or the repository route, to open access. So that's things like UQ eSpace in UQ. And that's due to the way Australia came to deal with open access. So institutions were funded to develop that infrastructure. The most significant thing to happen in Australia in the open access landscape of late, however, has been the appointment of Cathy Foley as the Chief Scientist, and her statements about the importance of open access to Australia and how she is going to treat it as one of the 4 pillars that she works on during her tenure in that role. So we're all waiting for a paper that Cathy Foley is working on to see what direction that might take, but it really is gaining the interest of the university sector and more broadly, because it's not just about university research that Cathy Foley is talking about. It's research across Australia in all different avenues. If we go on to the next slide, please, Justine. So within UQ, what does this actually look like? Well, our policy position is relatively weak because we take the lead from the ARC and NHMRC requirements. So our policy is basically open access is good, do what you need to do from ARC and NHMRC's perspective. But as we've said, their policies are quite weak. So our policy is relatively passive. One of the things that is happening within UQ is this move to the individual activity profile, research performance dashboard approach. And that moves us further towards a DORA-like approach for research assessment, where there's this basket of metrics and tries to distance UQ from thinking about research performance as just the quality of a journal based on impact factor. So actually looking at a whole suite of measures. That's a good thing, because it then means that publishing in an open access journal, there's a lot more freedom from your typical academic to choose where to publish without being tied into this, tied into this notion that you have to go for a high impact factor journal at the expense of all other considerations. The other interesting thing to note is that UQ is a signatory of the Sorbonne Declaration with the rest of the G08, and that relates to the sharing of research data. So that's, an in-principle support for making research data as accessible as it can be. In practice, what actually happens is that we know that despite the fact that we have eSpace and people can deposit their author-accepted manuscripts within eSpace, a lot of academics are paying article processing charges, and we have no way of centrally seeing what's being paid there. We've done some estimates, and we think it's between $1 and $1.5 million per year that are being paid in article processing charges. And quite often that money is being paid to the same publishers who we pay subscriptions to. So that's that idea of double dipping. So these publishers like Elsevier are taking our money so you can read their journal articles, but they're also taking your money so that they can make them open access immediately. That's on top of the free labour that you're all doing for publishers in terms of peer review and on editorial boards, etc. In practice within UQ, we've also got some read and publish deals that you can take advantage of. And in that case, the subscription and some prepaid APCs are included all in one bundle, which means that you can get your article open access in a non-open access journal without having to outlay any money. The other thing to point out is that open research is, of course, much broader than just open access to research publications. So it encompasses things like the sharing of research data or the sharing of code. We have really good infrastructure within UQ to facilitate that. So there's not necessarily any reason to go to external providers to share data. You can use the infrastructure that we have available, which is a good thing. If we go on to the next slide, please, Justine. Very quickly, I'll leave these slides for you to look through later, but I did just want to position this discussion around read and publish deals in the context of the full library budget. Our current budget is just over 23 million, and that has to support research, teaching and learning, all of our collections. 93% of that is spent on subscriptions, which is mainly journals, leaving only 7% for one-off purchases, including e-textbooks and things for teaching and learning. If we go on to the next slide, there's some real challenges with that because our budget has not increased since 2020. We actually had a 3% cut in 2020, and since there's no real increase, publishers, it effectively means we can buy less with what we've got, because publishers, while they were kind in 2020 as a consequence of COVID, are back to their usual ways and have roughly between 2 and 16% increases each year. So effectively, we're going to have to cut something. Something has to give. We can't maintain what we've got with what we've collections that we have with what we've got. The other thing is that the acquisition of e-textbooks is incredibly expensive. So if you're thinking about e-textbooks for as teaching resources and learning resources, they're problematic because one e-textbook can come at a cost of $10,000 and have digital rights management associated with it. So it might only have 3 user licenses at any one time. So it's not a cheap thing to be able to provide those kinds of resources for the entire university community. But that budget really positions the APC spend in the context of our full outlay. If we go on, please, Justine. We don't only subscribe to big deals with places like publishers like Elsevier. We have a lot of different subscriptions. I won't talk any more about that because time is of the essence. If we go on to the next slide. The main point to make is that a lot of our budget, 51% of our collections budget is spent on 6 big publishers. So that's a lot of money every year that goes to those big publishers who make a lot of profit. And to give you some extra context here, the big Elsevier, Wiley, Springer Nature, Taylor and Francis, and IEEE, they represented 41% of our 2021 subscription spend. But together they accounted for almost 60% of the journal articles published by UQ for the period 2018 to 2020. So we publish more in those than we're currently paying for in terms of representative spend. If we go on to the next slide. The reason that budget is important is that it positions what we're trying to do with these read and publish deals quite nicely. So within Plan S, which is that push from the centred on Europe about trying to transform the way the publishing ecosystem is funded, there's these read and publish deals are part of that picture, and they're also known as transformative agreements. So what happens here is that we combine the payment for reading content or the subscriptions with the payment for publishing open access content. So this is to try and prevent the the library paying our, Elsevier, however many million we pay them, and then individual academics also paying article processing charges to make something open access. The idea here is to progress open access to the point where the publishers can flip to a fully open access model where it will be paying to publish rather than paying to read. But this is not necessarily the only pathway for open access. It's one pathway that's being pursued at the moment. And there are some issues with read and publish deals. So we do have some read and publish deals that you can take advantage of. If we go to the next slide, I'm sure that many of you in the room are thinking that this sounds great if your AP's article processing charges can be paid by someone else. So they're not free, they're paid up front by the library. But there are some unintended or potential unintended consequences of read and publish deals. The most significant of these is that there's disciplinary differences. So that's possibly not an issue for the audience here today. It also privileges those big publishers. They're in a much stronger position to negotiate. It also may result in increased expenditure by the university. So at the moment, 15% of what publishers make comes from private sector. But if suddenly that sector are not actually publishing, so if we're flipping to a pay to publish model, then where are the publishers going to get that additional revenue from? And that's where that point I made before about how our spend with the top 5 major publishers is 42% of our subscription spend, but nearly 60% of where we publish. The question is, we don't want to end up paying more. So whereas, how is that going to work? How are we going to make sure that it's not going to cost us more in the long run? And I think with that, I'm going to hand back to Justine, who's going to talk you through what deals are available. So this is where we have been able to negotiate deals through the Council of University Librarians for APCs prepaid as part of our subscription. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappear. I have another meeting I need to get to. Thank you very much for the invitation today, but over to Justine.
Thanks, Amberyn. Can I just check that everyone can hear me on Zoom okay?
Yes, I can hear very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so just to follow on from the sort of scene setting that Amberyn has done, from the 1st of January this year, we've had access to these read and publish deals that have been negotiated for us through the consortia Council of Australian University Libraries. So they've done the work of talking to the publishers and figuring out the deals. And then it's up to each individual institution which deals they pick up and go with. So these publishers listed here are the deals that we've got in place this year. It's taken a few years of negotiation to reach this point. And as Amberyn said, the Office of the Chief Scientist is working on a broader plan to kind of solve the open access problem across Australia, but we're not sure yet what that will look like, but it will be moving towards sort of more transformative deals where we're fully paying to publish rather than paying for subscriptions. There's a question here.
I was just going to ask if you could sort of briefly repeat what a read and publish deal is. I think that was sort of implicit in some of it.
Yes, okay, so a read and publish deal is a new way of, I guess, paying a publisher for access. So normally we would fund, well, we would pay the publishers via subscriptions. So we have a list of journals that we subscribe to each year. As Amberyn pointed out in that budget slide, it's like a significant expense. And then the read and publish deal is making a move or a transition towards more open access opportunities. And for open access publishing, the publishers charge you to publish in their journals. So rather than the library paying the subscription, the author of the article pays an article processing charge, but then the article is made available via open access. No subscription required to read it, but there's still a significant cost that goes to the publisher. So these read and publish deals, as Amberyn said, they're complex. Each publisher has determined their own sort of list of rules around how these deals function, and that can be difficult, you know, to negotiate for the library as well as the researchers or the academics wanting to publish articles. So within this bunch of deals, there's different types of options. So each publisher will choose the titles of the journals, you know, within their suite of titles that these deals apply to. So it's not all the journals in every case. And then within that as well, they will decide whether or not they have uncapped access to the prepaid article processing charges, which means anyone can publish at any time in that journal with the prepaid APC. Other publishers, like Wiley, for example, are putting a cap on the number of articles each year that can be published in those journal titles with a prepaid APC. That cap, that number is across all the institutions that are participating. So essentially all the universities in Australia were sharing that same number of prepaid APCs. So, and that cap was figured out based on the publishing activity across those institutions in the previous year. So,
do you have a sense that I was like, what if you get to the end of the process, find out the cap has been reached?
Yeah, this is just a question about what do you do if you are just about to publish your article and you find out that the cap has been reached. We haven't reached the cap yet, so we're not quite sure what will happen, but we're tracking the use of these agreements, and I will show you there's reports that you can access to see where we're at. I don't feel worried at this point looking at the figures, looking at the numbers, but it's hard to say for sure. And it's going to change, I think, the approach to publishing in some cases, because people will be sort of mindful, I guess, of wanting to get their papers covered. Yeah, it could be the case. So, but I'll show you a little bit more detail when I do the demo. So, and then in addition to the capped and uncapped deals, there's also some publishers like Wiley, Elsevier, for example, who are offering a discount on your APC. So no library prepaid APCs from Elsevier, but it's a discount of 12%, I think, on the article processing charge, which isn't a huge amount really. So you've got to remember that there's always the option to publish your research via UQ eSpace. So that's the green open access route, which is at no cost to you. Okay, so that's the basics about the read and publish deals. I'm going to show you now where you can go to find out a little bit more information on our website about it. I might need to pull up a chair to the computer to get this all working. Okay. So I don't usually use a Mac, so that's freaking me out a little bit. But if you go to the library website, so just library.uq.edu.au, and you can see the menu library services. If you look under services for researchers, you'll come to a website that'll have lots of useful information for you, but there's a section that says publish and share. And then under that, you can see a link that says Read and Publish Agreements 2022. So that brings you through to this page, which gives you a little bit more information that I've just covered about caps and uncapped agreements and discounts. The other thing it tells you is that there are certain things that are the same across the board with these agreements. So the corresponding author, in order to access one of these prepaid article processing charges, the corresponding author must be from UQ. And to be recognised as such, you need to use your UQ email address and the University of Queensland as the institution name when you're submitting your article. And then your articles will be published open access under a Creative Commons license. So we've got all the publishers listed here. If I just go into CSIRO as an example, it gives you a little bit more information about, that authors need to know about that specific deal. And then clicking on a link here will take you through to much more detailed information that's been put together by the Council of Australian University Libraries to help you sort of find out. It gives you a list of all the participating institutions. It gives you, if you click the included titles and sort of more information for authors. And in fact, down at the bottom, I was looking for a link to the reports so we can look at how the capped deals are tracking. Actually, that's just there on that link that says reports. This is updated fairly regularly. It's not showing for some reason, but it's tracking the usage. Here we go. So it's tracking the usage of this deal. It's got all the deals listed here, I think. Sorry, I don't look at these reports that regularly, but anyway, this is the reporting section where you go to find it. And it does include a note that sort of tracks if there's a big spike in the usage of those prepaid APCs, and a warning, I guess, that it's possible that the caps will be exceeded before the end of the year. So, I mean, that will be taken into consideration when negotiations are done for the deals for the following year. So it's all a bit just try it and see this year. But yeah, it's definitely worth knowing that you're not necessarily going to get that APC if they've all been exhausted by authors from our institution or other institutions. All right. Right. Yeah, I haven't had too much to do with sorry. So it was a question about if the cap is reached during the process of you submitting your article, will that mean that the article is not published? Yeah, I would say that if you're in that situation, the expectation from the publisher would be that that you would need to fund the APC for that particular article. I don't know for sure because we haven't kind of, I guess, reached discussions on this yet, but the publishers aren't known for being friendly or understanding. So my guess is that you'd be expected to pay that APC.
There's something that you have to do, or you just wait and then you get accepted in the library, or?
So the question's about a little bit more detail around when you're submitting these articles, the requirements beyond just using your UQ email address and the UQ as the institution that you're publishing from. The library won't have anything to do with the process of submitting the article. So that website that I was just showing you,
It's just a box you tick. If you apply to the YouTube email, that's how I got this.
Yeah. So
doesn't even have to live, but you have to, so circumstance say to the library that you have a
No, it doesn't have to be the library. It's like literally, it has to do with your UQ email. E-box that you check.
yeah, so this is clarification about what else you might need to do in the process of getting your article published to make it clear that you're accessing one of the prepaid APCs as part of our read and publish deal. And the answer is all you. Well, different publishers are different, but they should pick up in the. Yeah, so the library doesn't need to know anything about, who's using the deals or any of that in the process of following the instructions for authors for that particular journal title. It will either be made clear in those instructions or it will be picked up when your request to publish comes through that we have a deal in place with that publisher. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm going to show you a way that you can find out for certain more easily in advance whether or not these sort of deals are in place. I'll just go back to my slides. Okay. Oh, I should mention also that the library scholarly publishing team, who you can contact via email, is just scholarlypublishing@library.uq.edu.au, are here to help with questions like that. So if you need any assistance kind of unpicking or understanding these deals, they're very happy to be contacted by email. They'll give you a call and they'll talk you through the specifics of the article that you have and the journal that you want to publish in. So I've talked to you about where to find the information on the library website. We'll pass on this PowerPoint after the seminar so that you have access to all the links and everything. And then the next piece of work that I wanted to talk to you about is our new journal search tool. So this has been in development for a little while and it's in its final stages of testing. So we haven't had a formal launch of it yet, but it is available now through UQ eSpace for you to use. And what it does, it helps you with, so this is a model for strategic scholarly publishing. The journal search tool will help you with the think and the check section. So it's what it does, and this is, I don't know of any other tools that have been developed within universities in Australia that helps you unpick these deals to this degree and make strategic decisions about where to publish. But what it does is it pulls in all the data that we know, the journal metrics data, so about sort of impact and prestige and those sorts of things, and it combines it with the information about open access publishing to sort of help you make a strategic decision and find the best journal to publish in that also might have might be open access or have give you access to a prepaid APC. So I think I've just kind of said almost all of that. So it just allows you to search across a really wide range of journal data to help you make an evidence-based decision on when selecting where to publish. So one of the best uses of the journal search is to find out information about open access and where you can publish open access, and then find out the information about journal level metrics as well. And it has an interface that can support comparison between different journals as well, which I'll show you. After I've demoed the tool, it would be great if you wanted to give it a try for yourselves and pass on any feedback. We are still incorporating feedback before we do our final launch. I will say it doesn't work that well on mobile devices. It seems to work best with a bigger screen. But yes, do let us know your thoughts. You can email eSpace about that, and they'll be very happy to hear from you. So I'm going to just get out of my presentation again and go into a web browser and show you a demo of the tool. So if you just go to UQ eSpace as the starting point, you need to be logged in order to access the tool. That doesn't look right, but anyway. So you might have to just MFA your way through all these screens. Yes. Could have done this before, couldn't I? Anyway. Okay, so now we're logged into UQ eSpace, and you can see along the left-hand side that there are more options that open up when you're logged in. Journal search is just one of the options there. The first thing you need to do is just put in a broad, keyword, and then the step 2 pops up, so you can add in some other elements if you like, other keyword matches and that sort of thing. So it's just about having a play around with the terms that you usually search databases for, and then narrowing down using the step 2, and then well, that's interesting. Yeah, that'd be really useful. Thanks, Kate. Okay, so once you've done a search and you're happy with it, the results screen comes up, and that allows you to do a few things. So you can see that, I've got lots of pages of results here, so we can do some refining using the facets on the right-hand side of the screen. So if we just want to look at Q1 journals, for example, and we want to find read and publish, where read and publish agreements are available, we can click on the appropriate buttons here, and it will refine the list of results based on that criteria. And then we can have a look at the actual record for that particular journal title, which provides all of the information that you might want to look at to sort of help you make your decision. And then down at the bottom, it will tell you whether there's a read or publish agreement in place. So yes, we've got an agreement with the Royal Society of Chemistry, and you can click on that link to go through to the detailed information that I was showing you earlier about that particular deal. You can also click through to UQ eSpace to have a look at other articles that were published in this journal title recently by other UQ authors. If we go, back, what you can also do then is click on any of the journal titles that you're interested in, and then you can add them to a favorites list, so you can save them for later and they'll be there next time you log into UQ eSpace. But you can also choose to just compare the selected journals. So you've got your short list there. If we expand that button out, then you can have a look along. I don't know how to scroll. Oh, here we go on this Mac. So you can scroll across and see all of the data there, much in a way that's easy to sort of make comparisons between those journal titles. So I think that's probably where I'll leave it. So it's a pretty easy to use tool, but we'd love to get feedback, and we'd love to sort of help answer your specific questions if you have any. So please, don't hesitate to get in touch with the library. Aside from that, I guess I'll open it up for any questions or comments that you might have. Mm-hmm.
When setting up the journals, kind of the publishers have like
They pretty much can set their own terms. So, and what makes it really difficult for institutions negotiating deals is the fact that we rely on publishing in certain journals, or researchers rely on publishing in certain journals for the benefit of their career. So we need the publishers and we need those journals, but then that gives them all the power to, come up with these ways where we're paying twice, in terms of subscription and article processing charges and things like that. And I think these publishers are like, their profits are enormous, so more than Apple and those big corporations and stuff like that. So they've really got us stitched up. So what we're trying to do now is make everyone aware of what's happening in the system and the work that we're doing to try and negotiate better deals, but also I guess raising awareness of how valuable researchers are in terms of the power that they hold that we might be able to harness to help negotiate better deals. I mean, Kathy Foley, in her sort of work she's doing in the Office of the Chief Scientist, was doing some sums and figured that in terms of peer review work that's been done for free within Australian institutions in the last 12 months, it's worth, almost $40 million. So we're just sort of raising awareness and trying to connect with allies around the place so that we have, I guess, more power when we go and negotiate these deals. And hopefully what we'll do is something similar to what the University of California has done with Elsevier, where, they cancelled their Elsevier subscriptions and refused to resubscribe until Elsevier gave them a more reasonable deal. So that's the sort of what we're sort of working towards, and the read and publish deals are an interim piece of work for that.
The library system also interacts with the scientists, because they're not by us. So I think that's another point of leverage that can be used in the negotiation.
Yeah. So this comment was saying that it'd be good for the library to kind of interact more with the way the review system works, so that we are all involved, I guess, in understanding the work that's done and then utilising that in terms of our negotiations with the publishers. Question on Zoom.
Hi, thanks very much for that presentation, and thanks to Amberyn too. I was wondering about gold OA journals. I guess sort of by definition, read and publish agreements don't cover open access only journals, right? Because there's no subscription fee for those. So I guess my question is sort of in two parts. Well, first, whether that's the case. And then secondly, I suppose what UQ's plan is to deal with that transition to fully OA. At the moment, the academic is entirely, under UQ's current policies, the academic has to cover fees for open access only journals. And I was wondering if UQ has any plans to try and help shoulder those ever increasing costs. I mean, we have to pay tens of thousands of dollars a year publishing fees, and it's starting to get incredibly hard, especially with the internal financial situation within UQ being what it is. I guess from the academic front line, I know this isn't it's not a criticism of you. I know there's a lot of issues at play here, but just wondering what the thinking is in UQ around those sort of issues. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that discussion has been had yet, but I think we're working towards it. So the library has no oversight of, the total spend. Amberyn alluded to a calculation that we've done, but publishers will often tell us they don't know who's published in there. If we try and get that data, they say, oh, we don't have that data. So we can't get a really clear picture of how much we're paying across the board for article processing charges. But this year, we really started to realize that it can't just be the library in isolation negotiating for subscriptions, we have to involve the whole university community so that issues such as this can be addressed. So we have set up a group called the Scholarly Publishing and Open Access Working Party this year that has representations from each of the faculties and institutes and academic board, and all the sort of players are in the mix, and that's where we're trying to start to have those conversations basically. But we started in February and we're in the process still of doing the education piece, but then we'll start to move towards, what can we practically do and how can we all work together towards, a better outcome for UQ publishing.
Yeah, great, thanks. And I guess the ultimate problem is the money for that's never going to come from the publishers, because when they're publishing pure OA journal, they need the money to come from the authors or the authors institution or a funding body, I guess. I mean, ideally, perhaps an Australian funding body might pick up those charges. But thanks very much. I'll be quiet there. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And that's what Amberyn was saying too. We need to make sure when we flip to a fully open access model where we pay to publish, that we're not in a worse position because we're making up the shortfall from non-university groups that would be subscribing to these journals as well. So it's a tricky balance that we're trying to find here. Any other questions? Yes, one from in the room. Two from in the room. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how did we get into this mess where we're paying from both ends? Basically, it's hard to say for sure. It does go back, like Amberyn said, more than 20 years. Like I remember with my first librarian job at UQ, I was a liaison librarian, and our university librarian at the time was really, really up in arms about how much we were paying in our subscription fees. And it was all print subscriptions back then. So we were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars per journal title to essentially buy back the research that had been done within our own institution, funded, with public funding and things like that. And, she realized that wasn't right. And she and other librarians sort of got together and thought, well, can we cancel all of our subscriptions with Elsevier to make a point, which of course we could, but then there's the need to access them is still there. So what came out of that was the development of institutional repositories, so that institutional authors had a place where they could store a copy of their manuscripts, and that would be made openly available. So that sort of happened alongside, but the publishers still maintain the power because of the way that, we're always seeking out those impactful and prestigious journals to publish in, and there's a lot riding on that. So that's what we haven't, I guess, been able to crack yet. And then there's a second question. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, there will be. I don't know that our work's sort of up to that stage yet. I know the open access policy is being revised through this working party, and so that's something that we're looking at, but whether it's going to come out being firmer, I'm not quite sure. And we're just, I guess, in the process of putting ideas on paper and thinking about the most powerful way that we can kind of raise awareness and work, with researchers. But we will get to that point where we need a grassroots kind of movement or support from that grassroots level to really kind of take things to the next level. So I'm sure you'll hear more from us before too long, hopefully. Any final questions? Oh, that's great. Yeah, and yeah, Scott and Elena, they're the scholarly publishing team staff members. They really do know this in a lot more depth than I do, actually. So they'll be really useful to you if you have any specific questions after today.
I think one question.
Yep.
A lot of researchers also, in promoting their work, turn to more sensible means like articles, that sort of thing. Not necessarily through journals, but after they've already published. Where do you think that kind of fits in this whole thing? And that is free, but also maybe it gets you more buying power in terms of they're promoting the article that they published in that journal.
Yep. It was asking about how other pathways to publishing and promotion sort of fit into what I've just talked about today. And that definitely plays a part. It's about how we can track and measure the way that you promote and publish that sits outside the traditional scholarly publishing pathway. So we have different tools and things that can help track sort of impact and, you know, mentions on social media and all those kinds of things. So they do all feed into the bigger picture, but I don't think we have anything yet that's as powerful as the sort of straightforward, you know, publishing in scholarly journals pathway. Yeah, but it is all part of the picture for sure. Yeah, our Metrics Explorer is one of the tools that we have to help measure impact from sort of non-journal sources.
Okay.
All right.
Right, wrap it up there. Thank you everyone for attending on Zoom and attending in person. Jacket there. Yeah, thanks very much, Justine and Amberyn. Really interesting talk, and yeah, I look forward to using the library tool and using those resources when I come to publish, hopefully soon. Yeah, thanks everyone.